and switch over to Geoff Trotter. Is Geoff online?
Yes, I am. Hi. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes. How are you? It's nice to have you here.
Good. I'm very good, in fact. I've been thrilled listening to this. I mean, I've been pottering in the background, so I haven't been like you stuck right in front of the machine for a while. So I've been doing stuff, and every now and again, someone says, you go, "Oh, who said that?" And it's fascinating. First things first, before we get into it, I'm. It's amazing. You've been going since before 9 o'clock, and you're still sitting there. Have you eaten? Have you had a drink? Have you had a break?
Yes. We do take breaks, and sprouted hemp seeds
Right.
work really well. So good energy.
You okay? That's good. That's good to know. Well, as I say, I'm thrilled to be
Thank
here.
you.
So thanks very much for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Um, Geoff is Geoff Trotter is the Chief Growth Officer and co-founder of Regennabis. And where are you broadcasting from today?
San Francisco.
Okay, so you're on the West Coast,
Yeah,
along
yeah,
with us.
yeah,
So today you're going to be discussing responsible capital.
yeah.
And
That's the
I'd
thing.
also like to ask if you could tell our audience, how did you get into the cannabis industry, and what
Sure.
was your motivation? And
Yeah,
then
my
I'll toss it over
motivation.
to Jill.
Yeah, my motivation. So I'll give a little bit of history because then that will explain my motivation, not just for the cannabis industry, but my motivation period, if you like, for the work I do. I like to describe myself as a corporate refugee. I worked in the world of corporates for many years. In fact, fascinating just listening to John there. I first visited China in 1987, when China was really just getting off the ground around its own intellectual property, and establishing itself in a sort of pre-WTO arrangement. And at that time, I was working for an information services company selling information. Actually, it happened to be patent information or patent information, depends how you say that, into the Chinese government. So I was spending a lot of time actually working with the Chinese government. And there was a question in the chat that says, do they steal your intellectual property? Yes, in the past they did, but not now. They've for sure turned a corner. And in fact, in the courts there, they aggressively pursue anybody that is involved in intellectual property theft. So the world has certainly changed. But that was my first foray into the world of corporate. I worked for Thomson, which was Thomson Corporation, which is a publishing company. I then spent some time with Guinness World Records. I was the general manager at Guinness World Records, did some TV work for Guinness, the ultimate book of knowledge. And then late 1999, 2000, I joined Ernst & Young, which is quite a pivot for me. Ernst & Young, one of the big four, then it was one of the big eight advisory firms, accounting firms, which was an interesting twist for me because the idea of having to put on a pinstripe suit and gray suit or a blue suit and act proper all the time was as far removed from the sort of career path that I wanted to take. But they thrilled me with what they were doing in the world of knowledge, and I joined them and undertook a role as their chief knowledge officer, initially in the UK, but then I moved to Hong Kong. And I spent a decade in Hong Kong, and was frequently then traveling in and out of China. So I've been an avid fan of what's been going on in China over the years. And funnily enough, one of the reasons I moved out of the corporate world in roughly 2009, I left the partnership. I was a partner with Ernst & Young for some time. And as I stepped away because I really wanted to work in the world of sustainability. And so I left the firm, created my own firm, was looking at a number of different opportunities around the environmental challenges as well as some social challenges. And one of the things that I do recall, and so I often say it wasn't an epiphany like that I moved from the corporate world. It was a series of what I call miniphanies, sort of small epiphanies. And one of them was one time I came out of a business meeting in the middle of Chongqing, which is one of the big cities in China that most people have not heard of. It's about 35 million people population. It was early in the morning. I couldn't see across the street. I literally couldn't see across the street because of what initially I thought was smoke, pretty acrid smoke, very sort of sodium type smoke. And I realized that basically this was the industrial engine of China at work. And funnily enough, also just the week prior, the Chinese state government had just released their most recent 5-year plan, which was also talking about, multi-digit growth, like 10% year-on-year GDP growth. And I just remember thinking to myself, it's just not sustainable. I remember thinking, it's crazy that if we continue growing in this way, we will collapse. And I don't mean physically you and I, but the world will collapse. I was really threw me. And that's when I really began to think about the environment way more than I had ever done before, and beginning to really understand some of the differences that were happening at a social level because of the lack of environmental justice. So it really kind of threw a wobbler for me, to use a term. So I quit the firm and started to study at the Presidio Graduate School in 2011 here in California, in San Francisco. So I was frequently in and out of Asia, back to Hong Kong and the like. And then finally, I decided to stay. Of course, to stay, it meant I had to get the requisite visas and the like, which I did. And as I graduated from the Presidio Graduate School, I moved into the nonprofit world and took a role with a group called Global Footprint Network, a really cool group, science-based, that looks to put ecological limits central to economic policy making. So it's all well and good that we look at your traditional economic models. But if we continue with these economic models and don't take the ecological aspects into effect, so in essence, we only look at human capital to use economic capital to make things, and we don't take natural capital, wood, water, etc., into effect, then again, we're going to fail. And so I really enjoyed that work, but I missed the corporate sort of cut and thrust. And so I intentionally stepped away from there, and I joined a group called Sustainable Brands in the middle of this current decade, so 2014 to 17. Loved Sustainable Brands, visionary leader, CEO Koan Vikaran Skriznias, who was just ahead of her time. And as Sustainable Brands might give an indication, it was working with some of the largest branded corporations in the world and helping them on their sustainability journey, including calling them out on greenwashing, etc. I was in business development there. That's where I met Patrick McCartan, who's a co-founder also with Regennabis. And he and I were very much really helping large branded corporations think through their sustainability journey. I stepped away 2017, undertook some interesting projects aligned to different agencies in the United Nations, stuff like modern slavery and human trafficking, obviously eradicating it. And so through that time, I was really doing a lot of work related to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so Regennabis came about because as Patrick and I had gone our separate ways, we would maintain a good contact with each other, and we would have a great sort of lunch, chat about stuff at Café de la Presse, if you know it, in San Francisco. We would have like a lunch, and he would have his little 6-month-old there, and 2 men and a baby kind of having a conversation about what's going on in the world. And he had already been on a journey in the world of cannabis, and he was doing some great things. And cannabis was as far removed from my life as anything could ever be. But I was intrigued, and I was recalling also in something that John just referenced earlier, hemp was everywhere in China. And I was always wondering, why is hemp here, but why do people why does it have the reputation it has? And so my curiosity was getting the best of me. We formed Regennabis to bring together all of the smarts that both he and I have, which is around advising, convening, and investing. So those are the 3 things that we do. But we kind of the sort of underlying element of what we say and what we do at Regennabis is that the advisory, the convening, and the investment are really around smart ideas, smart people, and smart money. So from an investment perspective, what we look at is specifically impact investing monies and funds, as well as family offices. So we look at a different type of more responsible capital, and we look at the opportunity to bring that that massive amount of asset under management and growing, to bring that into the cannabis and hemp space, because we see that if they're very impact oriented, generally family offices. So we see that as a way to help create a different version of the cannabis industry from perhaps one that might already be out the door, that some people are kind of decrying, and where you have massive companies with $1.3 billion write-offs in a quarter. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way the business is growing up, and so we see an opportunity to help course correct that. And we use the Sustainable Development Goals to underpin all of the work that we're doing in that space. So it's a very long answer to your question, but we got there.
That was incredible, Geoff. Thank you for giving us that background and introducing so many concepts to the conversation about conscious capitalism, this legacy investing that you touched on. I would love to hear from you a little bit more about that. What are the shifts that you've seen over the past perhaps 20 years in legacy investing? Have you seen shifts more recently, perhaps in, I think you'd mentioned Asia to me earlier, more recently? And why are cannabis and hemp so attractive to those investors? What's that new ecosystem like? Yeah,
those are great questions. And there is a narrative and a story that I could link all of the questions with an answer that hopefully makes sense for listeners and viewers. I obviously, having worked for many years with Ernst & Young, I have a pretty good understanding of what's happening in the capital markets and in the private equity world and the venture capital world. Certainly got to understand an awful lot more of what's happening in the venture capital world as I moved here into the Bay Area, which you could argue is the home and the beating heart of the venture capital world. What was clear to me was that there's other forms of capital, managed capital, through impact investing and through family offices. And I realized over time that it was rapidly growing, this sort of impact world. In fact, in the US alone in 2018, some $48 trillion, that's a T, $48 trillion were managed professionally by money managers. That's $48 trillion in the US. Of that, about 1 in every $4, so it's $12 trillion, was actually invested in sustainable, responsible impact investing. So 1 in $4. That was in 2018. That has actually now increased, latest numbers. And I'm going to put some reports into the chat later so your viewers and listeners can see that. But a lot of rich data in these reports. But just looking at some of the data there, there are now, in terms of family offices, there are some 7,300 single family offices. And the difference between a single family office and what we call a multi-family office is that a single family office is taking care of its own interests around where it wishes to be placing its investment monies, and is using professional money management persons to manage their funds for them. And to be a family office, you need minimum $50 million to be playing with. So this is, and many family offices are much bigger than that. A multifamily office is where you have a group of smaller family offices that generally work with one group to manage let's call it I wouldn't call it a conglomerate. It's basically a group of family offices that then just are led by one particular operator. But there are 7,300 single family offices, which is already 38% up from 2017. So I'm just looking at some stats here, which I can read. So a 38% growth in the number of family offices in 2.5 years. Of those, 42% of them are in the US. That's 3,100 family offices. 32% in Europe. 18% in Asia Pacific. So that's 1,300 family offices in Asia Pacific alone, which is a 44% increase since 2017. So the increase is even greater in Asia Pacific. And then there's the laggard here is a group of Latin America, Middle East, and Africa with 8%. That's 600 family offices in this group. But the growth in family offices is really remarkable. And where that growth is really coming from, family offices are either family or high net worth individual or a very high, ultra high net worth individual that is looking to utilize their funds in a responsible impact investing way. And the way they generally look at this is they, of course, have, just like any other venture fund, private equity fund, generally speaking, they have an investment thesis. This is how much money they wish to play. Is it in the startup world? Is it in the growth world? Is it in the capital markets? Wherever. But what they're also looking at is that they also have something called an impact thesis. So they're looking not only at an economic upside, an economic impact for themselves, as well as, of course, the organization they're investing in. They're also looking for some social impact and some environmental impact. In other words, they want to make sure that the organization that they're investing in is also delivering a social upside and or an environmental upside, preferably both. And you're probably familiar with the term, when you're in the funding world, people say, oh, I'm seeking alpha. Seeking alpha. Seeking alpha basically means you want to outperform the markets. Impact alpha, from our perspective, is where you're not only outperforming the markets, but you're also delivering social impact as well as environmental impact. So the planet is a better place, and society is also a better place. And just to sort of paraphrase also what many of your speakers have said thus far today, at Regennabis, we fundamentally believe that making money and doing good are not mutually exclusive. There was a time when people say, oh, you either make money or you work in charity or you do good. They're not mutually exclusive. And the more and the sooner we kind of break free of that chain, for want of a term, the better off we'll be. It's just a mindset.
Absolutely. There was something that we had discussed the other day about, but you were just kind of discussing like the vicious cycle of capitalism when it doesn't really add and there are not enough winners in the cycle. So you shared with me this idea about, one way to think about a virtuous cycle, and you touched on this metaphor with the entourage effect, which was just such a perfect metaphor for, the cannabis industry. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. So, first I would say, when we look at the cannabis and the plant, I'm not sure that the world really fully understands what we have here. There are some that clearly do, and I'm thankful and grateful that they're making great strides to make that point and to show that there is an opportunity here. From our perspective, hemp and cannabis, as it grows and becomes a fully legalized industry, and the hemp industry in the United States is also already federally legal. But once we grasp this, and not only here in the US, but elsewhere in the world, in Mexico, hopefully, as we'll see this week, and other places, we will begin to see that actually not only is there an opportunity for the cannabis industry and the hemp industry to grow up healthily, but we'll also begin to understand that in actual fact, cannabis and hemp will impact many other industries. They will impact food, fuel, fashion, fibers, because you can put it into materials for packaging, or you can put it into materials for building. Farming, the whole regenerative agricultural play is massive. Finance, once we get federally legal for cannabis, we're going to see a massive opportunity around finance, the Safe Banking Act and beyond. And if we want to just play a little bit with words, the big area that the cannabis and hemp industry is going to play with is the pharma industry, which of course not an F, it's a PH, but you get where I'm going. So it's going to impact these other industries. And so if we just then take a little step back and look at the plant itself and what this understanding and the metaphor that people use, this entourage effect, sometimes called the ensemble effect, is where these compounds in the plant somehow find a way to work with each other, to give them a personality, to work with each other and to create the best version of the plant. So there's a multi-win model that's at play here. And this entourage effect, it happens at the micro level in the plant. At Regennabis, we see that there's an opportunity to look at this entourage effect at the meso level, meaning within the company or within your organization. Because if you begin to look at the stakeholders that are in your business, including those who are investing in you, but your employees, your leaders, your clients, your customers, all of these other stakeholders, and all of those stakeholders believe and deliver to an omni-win, a multi-win scenario, then that's the entourage effect happening at the corporate level, at the meso level. If we can do that at the macro level, which is where we have the industry and the impact that we can then create on the industry and then by the industry, then what we're looking at here is no longer just this vicious cycle that I referenced in an earlier conversation with you, Jill, and that is, typically the way capitalism work, and this mono-capitalism, so we're looking really at just the money, the economic capitalism, it generally is transactional and it generally is a zero-sum game. If we were to look at capitalism as a good thing, but not only economic capital, but to look at other forms of capital, intellectual capital, social capital, human capital, and natural capital. And frankly, without natural capital, the rest is going down anyway. If we don't have a healthy planet, and therefore a robust system, an ecosystem, then it doesn't make any difference how much money you have. You're going down. You may go down after the poorer person in the room, but you're going down. And we need to think about this economic model. We have to move from mono capital to multi-capital, and we have to think of single shareholder approach to a multi-stakeholder approach. And if we can get that right at the macro level, not only in the cannabis and hemp industries, but in other industries, then we will solve humanity's greatest challenges, which are laid out in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So that's what we refer to as the entourage effect.
I just love that metaphor, and it's just such an exciting and fresh perspective to bring to this. And I know that we're a little bit close to time, so I just want to check in to see if we've got any questions coming in from the audience. Maybe Tasha or Denise can tell us.
Sure, there's one question here. What's the one thing you want to leave people with, or what is, I guess, your greatest advice during this time?
Well, that's a great question. For anybody who's in the cannabis industry, no matter you're a grower, an extractor, maybe a distributor, multi-state operator, large multi-capital business north of the border here, or even if you're somewhere else in the world, I would really just ask that you begin to ask a question before you even start, or even if you have started, it's not too late, but ask the question, why? Why am I doing this? Why are we doing this? And beyond the why, what is the opportunity? What is the opportunity that we could still, as a group, deliver economic upside for us, but we can also deliver some social impact and or some environmental impact? And by social impact, in the cannabis industry, there, just very quickly, think about restorative justice. You can't possibly have a somewhat legalized industry. We talked earlier, and I know some others were talking about that cannabis now is essential. So if it's a lifesaver for some, it shouldn't be a lifesaver. It shouldn't be a life sentence for others. We need to be thinking about restorative justice, and we need to be thinking about Indigenous people's rights, because for sure, Indigenous people here in the United States and in Canada and around the world have been growing hemp and cannabis for a while. We need to make sure that they're protected when big ag comes knocking.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that the Indigenous populations are provided with sufficient cover, that they are not taken for a massive ride? So this is, these are the social areas that we need to look at. And then the environmental ones, thinking about, if we're a grower, what are we putting into the soil? Even though, as John had said earlier, cannabis and hemp is a phytoremediator. But if you're challenging the plant by putting pesticides and stuff that you don't really need, then you're not at all helping the environment. So what are the other things that we could look at? We're looking at big grows, indoor grows, whatever. Are there alternative forms of energy that we could be using, and moving away from a carbon-based fuel centric technology? So those are the sorts of things that we're looking at from an environmental perspective too. And so that's my advice. Just take a moment, reflect why, and what is the opportunity for us to be doing way more than perhaps we're currently doing.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. We had a guest on last Saturday that it represents his tribe and his community, and so I think that what you just said really falls in line with the things that he was saying. Also, that I was watching a TV show, and they were addressing the issue of social inequity, especially whenever it comes to running dispensaries. And they were hosting the TV show in the Bay Area, and so they were looking at different aspects where people were joining the program where they had been released from prison, and then they were allowed the opportunity to start dispensaries.
Mm-hmm.
But there's such an inequality in between the people that have millions of dollars and then the people that were in this program, and how much more difficult it is for the people in that program to be successfwe in their endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
So again, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. I mean, this is just critical work, and I know we were talking about other words earlier. I think this is an imperative. We have to get this right, not only in the cannabis industry, but across other industries. But in the cannabis industry, we have an enormous opportunity. We will not get this opportunity again in our lifetime, no matter how young you are, and you're at least 30 or 40 years younger than me. I can tell you, we will not get this chance again, and we shouldn't mess it up. We have a responsibility, and we should take it.
Absolutely. One of the other questions that came in was, what should cannabis companies be thinking about to better position themselves to tap into smart capital?
Oh, that's a great question, and it's actually it's right at the heart of our advisory work. So I mentioned we advise, we convene. Our advisory work, we really help cannabis companies, and not only cannabis companies. We work with Fortune 500 companies that are canna curious, that want to move into this industry, and so we help them. We help them navigate that. So we advise around sustainability and around branding. But in order to get there, we need to understand what's the current state of those within any organization. And so what we do is we help organizations think through their environmental, social governance framing, meaning the products and services that you're creating, what impact do they have on the environment? How might we mitigate that? What impact is it having on society? How might we exacerbate that? How might we actually do that more often? And of course, we also want to make sure that there's an economic upside. That's first and foremost from our perspective. Patrick and I are capitalists, but we're multi-capitalists. It's very different. So we help organizations think through this environmental, social governance framing. And the reason that's important is it helps them. We think it helps them with their strategic, their financial, and their operational goals. It helps them stay focused on what is important. But the other thing that it does it's a very bright flag to smart money, to impact investors, and to family offices that this organization is taking into consideration its environmental and its social responsibility, and therefore it's a company that I'm more likely to invest in because it fits with my impact thesis as well as my investment thesis. And that's a game changer again for this industry. Instead of somehow attracting the same kind of venture capital money, and as someone had also said earlier, sometimes they wish they'd never taken that money. We need to move away from that kind of money and move to the kind of capital that is really going to embrace organizations that are really out there trying to do all that they can to deliver an environmental and social upside. And so that's how we help companies. And the sooner a company gets on that journey around ESG and understanding its environmental, social governance factors, the better off it would be. And it's never too early to start, and it's also never too late to start for all of those companies on the markets out there. There are 448 publicly listed cannabis companies, and their ESG scores are woeful. And we're here to help because they need help, and that'll help them turn themselves around. And so that's the kind of work that we're doing, and it's never too early to start.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was just, I don't know, I'm just kind of speechless about, where you're coming from. And especially I'm big on social equity.
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Denise. I think we're ready for our next panelist.
We are.
Thank you so much. It was really nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. All of you. It's so fascinating. As I said, listening to you all has been great as I'm doing stuff in the background. But fundamentally great work that you're all doing. And I myself, Patrick, and Lena, who I've hardly mentioned as another co-founder, we're thrilled that there are folks like you doing this because it means that we're not alone. So.
And I'm honored to be part of the journey. Denise trained me into it, so I'm grateful to her for pulling me in and everyone has a role to play, and I'm very grateful and I'm very appreciative, and I have so much gratitude to be in this journey as well.
Well.